today's podcast, there's been a lot of anticipation. People all over the world, a lot of fans have been waiting for this one.
Yeah.
But yeah, now we're here. Today's the day. We're going to talk about vulnerability, and I'm here with my friend Tej. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Vulnerability, I feel like a lot of people in their minds, there might not necessarily be a clear definition, at least for me. When I hear that word, I don't have a clear definition. What is vulnerability to you?
I think to me, vulnerability is being truthful and authentic,
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to control the outcome. So like telling somebody that you love them first, and
Right.
you can't control whether they love you back or they say, "Oh, that's sick."
Yeah. That'd be
or
pretty brutal. Or
telling somebody that they hurt your feelings,
Yeah.
or something like that. You can't, and not being able to control the outcome and understanding that you can't, but feeling comfortable enough that you can tell your truth and be authentic in that.
Right, because I could imagine some people hearing the word vulnerability, and maybe even myself, years prior, maybe even a couple of years, hearing vulnerability and thinking of it as like a negative thing. Was there ever a time in your life where you would hear vulnerability, or maybe somebody would tell you, "Hey, you should be vulnerable," and you'd think, why would I want to be vulnerable? It's not a good thing, is it?
Yeah.
But obviously after looking into it more, and it turns out it is a good thing. Was there a time for you where vulnerability wasn't always a positive thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like it's very common. I think now it's becoming more normalized to that vulnerability actually represents like strength and bravery. But man, growing up, I definitely put on like a front of like being tough, and even still, like I'm still growing and still learning, but like friends saying like, you gotta like tell us when this is happening, because I don't want to. I feel like a lot of people don't want to burden others with their truth and what they have to say, but also there's this negative connotation of allowing yourself to like have those feelings of like being sad and being like open, because some people are like, well, there's such thing as like, too much and like too honest about how you're feeling. Definitely growing up though, I feel like I was taught, definitely not by my parents. My parents are lovely, but just by I guess my age group, my peers, that being open and vulnerable was like this monster, and it wasn't allowed, and there wasn't space for it, and it has taken years, and I'm still working on it, to like come to a place where I've like realized, I guess, that there's actually a lot of it's stronger to be vulnerable than it is to not be vulnerable, because to make it to the end of my life and realize that there was all these things that I've not said or not done because I'm afraid of how it will come off to others.
Right. Yeah. Like definitely in the high school days, I could see it being difficult to be vulnerable, and it might even be. Do you think there's like a difference between genders as far as how likely people are to be vulnerable? Because I'm just thinking with my friends and like guys in high school, like if you were to admit like, oh guys, I'm feeling kind of sad right now, I'm feeling maybe a little nervous, I could see you getting like people would make fun of you or things like that. Do you think with girls in general it's a little more accepted when you are vulnerable, or that's hard to say? It's kind of
I think it depends on the
person.
situation. I think with girls there are certain things that absolutely is more accepted, but there's also things that just generally speaking on like friend groups that you don't really want to talk about and don't feel comfortable being vulnerable about. For example, like if you're talking to a guy or you're dating a guy and then or a girl and you break up, and like the specifics of that, those are very vulnerable things, right? But you don't want to say it because that's it's taking your armor off.
Right.
Whereas with guys, like, I find as like one of the girls in our friend group, and the other girls in our friend group can attest to this, we're the ones that the guys go to if they need to like talk about something that's vulnerable, because they're afraid of, I'm assuming, how to come off if they said it to another guy in the group, right? And I've seen like, if we're like hanging out as a group, like, I've seen the way that guys interact with each other in terms of like vulnerable topics,
right?
And it kind of like, it pains me a bit, because I don't want to scold them like I'm their mom, but also I'm like, man, that's kind of hurtful. And then later on, I'll get a message from the guy who got hurt.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, that made me sad. And I'm like, you should say that out loud, because the thing is when you are the first one to be vulnerable about something, I found others follow, because they feel like there's a safe space now for them to do so.
Right.
But it always takes the first one. It's like when you're at a bar or a club, and the first person, everyone wants to dance, but no one wants to like be the first one to get up.
Right.
And like start dancing.
And everybody loves it too when the first person does take the charge or whatever, because usually in a lot of people's minds, they've been thinking and feeling in a similar way. Yeah. And then they see somebody open the door and they're like, okay, great.
Yeah,
but
I can do it.
It definitely takes a lot more courage to be that one person who opens up the door first, which, like you were saying before, is vulnerability and courage are almost like synonymous. They go together, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely I feel that how you're saying that, like, some of the guys might turn to some of the go to talk to a girl if they want to be a little bit more vulnerable. And I'm just reflecting on my life, and I have two brothers and one sister, but I definitely would go talk to my sister more often for, let's say there's like some relationship thing that I was dealing with, or something related to, I don't know, vulnerability, or wasn't feeling great or whatever. I would be more likely to talk to her, and that could just be a specific thing. She's closer in age to me, but there might also be something like you're saying, where just something about talking to girls about that stuff just feels a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
Which might not always be the case, but you definitely found that, like
like, I don't know, I feel like there's this preconceived notion, but also just in the way that we were raised, that like women are caretakers, right? We like have had that role placed upon us, and like, I don't mind it. I actually really like enjoy that I'm the person that people go to when they have issues to talk about, but I think also a lot of that comes from me being so open in my vulnerability. And I found like certain topics that I've talked about have opened doors for other people to feel like they can talk about it too, which like, I've got a lot of I don't want to say like heaps, but like, I've got a decent amount of messages from people saying like, you talked about sexual assault, and I feel open enough to like talk to my parents about it, or talk to my friends about it, and I've never done that before. Or people will come to me directly and, like, tell me some things that and that they've never told anyone, and I feel grateful, because I know what the weight of not talking about things feels like, and I'm sure everyone does. Like, I'm not special for feeling that way. Everyone has things that they want to say that they kind of keep hidden. Right. But I feel like being open has allowed me to do my own healing journey, but then also has allowed others to start theirs, because I've been so open about it, and vulnerable about it.
Yeah, there's definitely a psychological piece that comes along with being vulnerable and being willing to admit the things that are just true. Like, they're things that you're dealing with, and by kind of being open to them, I feel like you cut through the shame, and you also face the fear that's associated with not wanting to admit those things. And a lot of the time there are things that so many people deal with, pretty much everybody. Like, everyone. Humans are very vulnerable in general, and for whatever reason, there's a lot of things that everybody deals with that we still don't really want to talk about too much. Just like mental struggles in general, let's say like dealing with anxieties or depression. From time to time, almost everybody's gonna be going through stuff like that, but still sometimes there's a little bit of a fear to admit to those things. And I've noticed that happen where people, they really don't want to admit to those things. Like I can think of anxiety in particular, where I've noticed sometimes you can tell when people are anxious, right? Like you can just kind of read energy. Body language and energy. And I've seen people where like it's quite obvious that they're feeling anxious, but then I might talk to them later and they say, I don't feel anxiety. But I think in denying the truth and not being willing to be vulnerable and admit that you have the anxiety, it might actually prevent any development and almost make the anxiety worse, because
it does.
You not only are having the anxiety at that point, you're also having the shame associated with having the anxiety. So you have a little double situation there. But by saying, hey, I am nervous right now, I was anxious like an hour ago when I was in that situation, at that point you only have the anxiety, you no longer have the shame. And if anything, I feel like it will provide you with just a big relief. Like I could see that, because you're no longer, if it's been such a big thing that you're like afraid of admitting that you had anxiety, and now you admit it, it's just like a whole weight off your shoulders. The thing you were afraid of is just kind of disappeared.
And it also just like, if you have anxiety or depression or any other mental health issue, it allows the people that you surround yourself with to know these things, because often like when we keep them in, we're the only ones like with the weight of it on us. But when we allow our community to know these things about us, you know, like if I say like I have a panic attack, or I'm getting the auras of I'm gonna have a panic attack, if I'm dealing with that on my own and no one around me knows, they're like, why is she acting so weird? Like, why are you being rude? Why, you know, X, Y, Z. But if I'm at a party or something, or if I'm just hanging out with my friends and I'm feeling the auras and my best friends know, or just my friends in general know, and they do, and they're lovely and they're great about it, they'll be like, oh, do you want to go to your room for a sec? Do you want me to get you this? And you feel, one, you feel taken care of, you feel heard and seen, but you're not dealing with that on your own. And I think what people have to understand is it's vulnerable, but it is okay to ask for help, because if I think often like we do have the shame from it, but if we realize that, you know, like I would want my friends to tell me if they are having these issues, right?
Yeah.
So how would we feel if it was our friends, right? Like that's how I think of a lot of things. I'm like, oh, I don't want to tell anybody this, but if I knew my friend was dealing with it, I would want them to come to me, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to, I think, kind of put a mirror there and say like, you know, like if you're dealing with this, or if you're feeling like this, and it's the same thing with like how we talk negatively about ourselves. Like if my friend was saying this about themselves, I would be so angry.
Right.
Because I think they're so lovely, right? Yeah. But because it's me, it's different, and it's not different at all, right?
And you'd hate to know that some of your friends were dealing with those things, but the fear of being vulnerable had kind of prevented them from bringing it up to you when perhaps you could have given them some assistance, or given them a hand. Yeah. I also like the idea of just being vulnerable with yourself as well, and in the sense that like just not denying your own feelings, essentially. Yeah. Like and the anxiety one's a good one, where like you might even just kind of rationalize to yourself, because you might picture in your mind that this is a bad thing, anxiety. Yeah. I don't want it, so I'm gonna kind of repress it or rationalize to myself, but actually, you know what, I wasn't that anxious. No, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm fine. But in being vulnerable to yourself and just saying, let's be honest, I am feeling that way, it at least starts it sets you on a better path to even have a chance at maybe overcoming some of those things. Yeah. And like we were saying before, just a relief for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's vulnerability it's an interesting thing, because it can, how do you relate it to like weakness? What do you think if someone would say vulnerability and weakness are are related. Do you think that's what do you think about that?
That like I think I've just been doing so much work on it that like I understand the strength, but in that I also understand where someone's coming from when they say that it is weak, right?
Right.
But not being vulnerable and masking yourself, I think, is putting an armor on, right? And that's like a form of like protection, and you know, like nothing bad can happen because I'm protecting myself and I have this armor on. Whereas like being vulnerable is shedding yourself of the armor and being strong on your own without it. Right? Like I understand that it's very easy, especially like as men, I'm sure, just based off of you can have the best family, but if you surround yourself with peers that are like, no, this is like weak, that's like, men don't do that or whatever, you know, like I do understand where people are coming from, or men or women, or like I understand where they're coming from, but that all that to say, like being vulnerable is shedding yourself of the armor of not allowing yourself to have these vulnerable moments, allowing yourself the sadness and the anxiety and the depression, and it's allowing yourself to do that without any form of protection, because there can be a lot of growth as a person there when you let yourself feel everything.
Yeah, definitely. But to me, even like if I was to, let's say, write down all the areas that I'm the most vulnerable, in some way I would be feeling as if I'm writing down all the areas that I'm not strong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'm saying like these are the areas where like whether it's physically, emotionally, whatever, I'm vulnerable and more open to problems or like attack, I guess.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it almost seems like, okay, these aren't good things to have, but at the same time, it's also, I guess it comes along with just the acceptance of this is what it means to be a human being, is that people are extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And everybody's gonna have that list of things that are maybe they're not invincible in those areas. But the strength really is in accepting those things and then moving forward regardless of it.
Yeah.
Like it's definitely not the same as weakness but I feel like there is some, I don't know, there's some like relation there a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but
well, I think also though in saying that like these areas and these things that you're talking about, like those areas of vulnerability and like where you're vulnerable, it's good that you acknowledge those things, but I think just based on like being a man and all that and working through that, and like what it is to be a man, like acknowledging like the actual strength there to that you see them as weaknesses is like a huge thing, like that you think that they're weaknesses, but you know that they're not, and that there's some strength there. I think that that's an important thing to like note to yourself, of like before you maybe would have written these things down and they were only weaknesses, but now you're writing them down and you're like, I still have some sort of attachment to the weakness, but I acknowledge that there are strengths as well. Yeah,
because like let's say we think about the most vulnerable people, maybe like elderly person. How would we relate that to being not weak? Like let's say there's someone who's extremely frail and need a lot of assistance. They are vulnerable, but are they also, is there weakness there, or that's just, it is what it is and everybody's, I don't know.
I don't know if there's like, because there's obviously a very strong difference between like your physicality and your like the abilities that you do have in those regards, and then your strength mentally and
Right.
Emotionally.
Right,
Like,
right.
those are two very different
Yeah, like that
two very
person could
different
be
things.
extremely strong mentally
Yeah.
because, and it might in part be because physically, um, they are frail, but they still have the courage and strength to go out in the world
Yeah.
and face any of the things that could, like, there's a lot of things that could take more things that could take them out than maybe
Yeah.
the average person. So it takes more courage for them to go out there and put themselves on the line and live their life.
I think something really actually kind of cool that you bring that up though, but you know, when you meet like an older person, they're so open about everything that they've been through in their life, and they seem like they've like shed this like weight. You know, when you get older, you're just like, I need younger people to like hear these things and hear these stories, and they're so open, and it's amazing to see, and it's amazing to hear, because I feel like whenever I encounter somebody like that, I learn so much. But they're open, like like that's so cool, and it's important, because we walk through life, and walking through life and then getting to like 80 years old and then finally feeling like you can tell somebody these things,
Right.
It's amazing once you get there. Like, but going through your whole life wearing this armor and then finally shedding it once you're like 80 to tell these people your stories, it's probably like the worst feeling. Right. And but they're finally like vulnerable with everything that they've been through, and I've heard you know, some crazy stories from like older people that they don't talk about until they're older, until they feel comfortable, because nobody's going to be vulnerable until they have made peace with themselves, that they, or give themselves permission to do so, right? Like, nobody's going to be completely and fully like vulnerable and honest and truthful in like their story.
It's like, like they finally get tired of putting up that facade, and like you're saying, like it does feel like you're shedding like weights or whatever. Like, it is such a relief to just be like, hey, this is what it is, this is how I feel, this is who I am. And that's it. Like I think it is an amazing relief to just be super open about everything. Because I think people maybe, especially these days, like to have a bit of an image. They cultivate an image or cultivate a facade, and social media probably plays a big role in that. Huge part. But that's almost like the antithesis of vulnerability in some ways, where it's like, hey, we're not actually showing the real self. We're putting on a bit of a front, and avoiding being vulnerable. And people are maybe ever like especially fearful of being really vulnerable on social media, because then you're compared to all these people who they have their facade up, and now if there's like a direct comparison, it's like, I don't know, you just feel worse about yourself, because you know what I mean though, like
it's so interesting with social media, because I feel like initially it was created for this like to connect people, right? And then it's become like influencers and all of this, and there are even influencers who have built their brand on being open and honest, and then it becomes like this brand, and it doesn't feel authentic anymore.
Right.
And I feel like the line is so thin of like, I am being completely and honestly myself, or I am doing this because my followers want to hear about this. Right. I think that's such an interesting, I don't even know how to play it. I think it's so interesting that it was built for connecting and telling stories and being creators, and even just, you know, sharing like your friends or sharing your animals or things like that. And then it's kind of like warped into this branding yourself. Like, every individual account is a brand. Like, if you look at your social media or mine or any of my friends or any famous person, like their social media, their Instagram, their whatever it is, that is their brand. And it's not even necessarily them, because it's very carefully curated. It doesn't matter how many little followers you have, or how many, like, you can say that you don't post for anybody and you post for yourself, but everything is very carefully curated always.
Yeah. But that must feel bad though, like I would imagine, because I could picture, let's say I had a social media page where it was like extremely cultivated to make me look in a way that's different from the way my life actually is.
Yeah.
Every time I would look at that page, I would feel like this isn't me. I don't know. I just like, it wouldn't feel great because.
No.
And then, you know, let's say you are getting a lot of positive feedback on that. You, like, deep down, like when you're thinking about it, you'll be like, this positive feedback is for something that actually isn't me.
Yeah.
And so you might be digging yourself a deeper hole of being afraid to actually put your real self out there because you're like, oh, but I get all this positive feedback when I'm doing something that's not me.
Yeah.
So like, maybe I should just keep doing that.
Oh,
I could see people feeling like that.
Yeah. I have a huge thing with that because especially with like all the, oh my gosh, there's so much going on in the world with like climate change and Black Lives Matter and all these things. And I used to be very, like quiet about these things because I wasn't educated enough to actually like speak on certain issues. But once I was and I did my own research, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna talk about it. Yeah. I lost so many followers.
Oh, really?
Oh my gosh, so many, and got into like heated debates like over Instagram DMs and stuff. Yeah, or like people sending me like things that I would have said. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my god. Yeah. Like
I love those online debates. It's just like I don't know, it seems like so crazy. People can get so riled up just like arguing over stuff.
And I love
online.
A good debate too, which is like the worst part of it, whereas like my friends are like, just step away. Like you don't need to. And sometimes there's no like reteaching someone, like, which is like the hardest thing for me when I feel like there is a right answer to this and this isn't it, like you should see it this way. Right. Like I've had to kind of like rewire my brain to be like, sometimes it's just like there's no point, you're just both so worked up about an issue that you're not even listening to each other anymore, you're just yelling to yell. You know, like,
and maybe vulnerability is a bit of a issue there, is because people are unwilling to consider the possibility that their idea is actually wrong. You know what I mean? Like they're not thinking that, oh, potentially I have something that actually isn't right here. You know what I mean? Like where immediately they'll just go on the defensive of like, well, to start this argument, I know I'm right, let's just like see where you're wrong. Whereas instead of thinking, okay, let's see, there's a possibility I'm wrong here too. Well, where are they right? Where are they wrong? And maybe that's another aspect where
let me pick apart
a bit more of vulnerability would help with the conflicts on social media.
Like willingness to listen, I think, for sure. Like I used to love debating, like in school, like when I was in school, law class and international affairs and all that fun stuff. And I found, especially now, like learning about vulnerability and about myself and all these things and doing actively putting work on myself, I found that I've become a much better listener, like a proper like active listener when I talk to people instead of like waiting to speak next. Because I want to allow other people the space, right? Like I want to allow myself and give myself permission to be vulnerable and have space and speak my truth. But in that, I've learned that I need to give other people the space to do so, right? And like making a safe space for other people to feel like they can talk about certain things if they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it actually has gotten better over time. I know we were talking about how social media might not be the best for promoting vulnerability. I mean, obviously depends which page you're looking at and all that. But I think throughout maybe the last 50, 100 years, people have become a lot more open. I know discussing like mental health issues like 50 years ago or in like my grandparents' era, that was a lot more taboo. Like it's like, oh no, don't talk about that. Which is crazy because it's like you could be in like a room and like everybody's feeling the same thing. But everybody's like, no, don't bring that up. That's not okay. Like that's not okay to say.
Don't do it.
But then like you're just looking around at everyone and it's like, Aren't we all like
we're
on
all
the same
feeling like
page here? Like
this.
we're all kind of.
It's like when you're in an interview and you're all so nervous. Like you can see everyone sweating and shaking and reading over their notes, whatever. Like when you used to do those like big, everyone waits in like the waiting room kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would ask somebody like, oh, like how are you feeling? They're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm feeling great. Like that's exactly what I mean. Like in a space like that where you could be feeling the exact same way, like in high school talking about like depression or anxiety, or even now, you could like ask somebody how they're doing. They're like, I'm actually amazing. Or like over COVID, like everyone was feeling terrible, especially like the first like quarantine, March 2020, right? Everyone was like feeling terrible. The first few weeks, albeit, were pretty fun because we all thought it was only going to be 3 weeks, so we were living our lives. But after that, it was like, oh, like how are you doing? Somebody would be like, I'm actually great, like I'm like working out at home now, or I'm actually great, like I picked up like 12 new hobbies. And I was like, well, right, yeah. That doesn't sound healthy. And then like later on, like talking about it again, they were like, yeah, I was actually like really sad. And I was like, why didn't you say that? You know, like I will, or like somebody saying that and then me going, yeah, no, I'm actually like, I'm not feeling great. I don't love my job, XYZ, whatever. And then they were like, yeah, I'm actually not doing great either. And I was like, well, we'll leave it. Like you just said that you weren't. But me saying, you know, like it's the same thing. It circles back to when you are vulnerable and open about, you know, these little things, it allows other people the space where they also feel safe enough that they could do so. Right. I think as people we're always expected, or we're expecting, to feel judged or like to get judgment from other people.
There might too, like, as well be like a time and a place and maybe person to be like where it's best to be vulnerable, because I could see situations where, let's say you're at work and like, I don't know, you run into Karen or whatever in the lunchroom and like, let's say, I don't know, she is just extremely vulnerable right there in the moment while you're like cooking your food. Just so like maybe she's going through a divorce or something and is feeling really bad. If stuff like this is happening on a daily basis, and maybe you're not super close to Karen, I don't know, I could just see like there's definitely a reason where sometimes people would withhold the information and bottle it up because they don't want to burden anybody else, or they don't want to like ruin the vibes, you know what I mean? Like let's say like you were having like a blast or whatever, and then someone's like, hey, you know what, this really, really bad thing's happening right now. And then I could see that where you might want to just wait for a different time, or maybe wait for the right person, because you can't, like you don't want to just always be like throwing out all your biggest vulnerabilities and your problems just all the time. It's like a time and
it's hard because I find like typically when people kind of do it at inappropriate times, it's because they've bottled it up for so long. You know, like I've had people that I've met in like, I mean, the girls' bathrooms at bars and whatever are notorious for this. Right. But I don't know, and will like lay it all out, and it's because they bottled it up for so long. But also I find obviously like there's a time and place, and typically like the social standards or whatever are met. But it's also like if something's weighing on your mind, there's never really a right time to bring it up. You know, like if you went through something, or like on the way to your friend's house something happened and it was terrible and you're just like, oh, I need to talk to somebody about it, there's never really a right time. But also like once you've said the thing, maybe it'll be a bit awkward after, but you'll feel much better, and you won't be so tense the whole time that you're like hanging out with somebody or hanging out with like a group. Like maybe it'll be awkward for a second, but then it'll actually, like, the atmosphere I feel like would be a lot better after you like say these things.
Do you ever feel like sometimes by being vulnerable and sharing something that's bothering you to somebody else, it actually makes you feel worse? Because I might just be me personally, but sometimes by like sharing the things that are going that are problematic or going wrong in my life with other people, sometimes it makes me more stressed out, because it's almost as if my problems have like spread, or like now there's somebody like asking me like, oh, how's that going, like, are you feeling better now, or like what's, and like like, I don't know, it's like almost a reminder every time they're
You don't
asking me about it, where sometimes me personally, I don't know, I find more relief in just keeping it to myself. It obviously depends on what the situation is, but
Yeah.
do you ever feel that where like, oh, now all these people know about it and they're asking me, like, they're like, a day passes and they're like, oh, are you still feeling bad? And like, just by them like asking you that, it just reminds you of it again. And it's like maybe I should have just kept this. I don't know.
Think,
does that you ever feel that?
I think maybe that comes from like being uncomfortable with like being taken care of and like asking for help, because when you come to people with these things, it's almost like as if you're asking for help, right?
Right.
Yeah, the reminders is I think it depends, because sometimes I will feel worse after. Most of the time I don't, just based on like who I choose to spend my time with these days, but normally I feel a lot better. And I think it when I did feel terrible after, it was normally the way that it was received by the other person. You know, but I think you should allow people to check in on you, but when it's like overdone, it's overdone, and like it's a bit much.
Yeah.
But I think also maybe that comes from like you thinking it's like a reminder of weakness. Like I could be reading that wrong, but you're just like,
it could be. I probably haven't like fully figured it out exactly, but I definitely feel that way sometimes, where like I would share something and then, or even like at work, I could I don't know, like if I'm really busy and stressed out, I don't even want to tell anybody else. Like I'll just like I'll have some people at work be like, oh, I'm so busy and stuff. I pretty much never will do that. Like I'll just keep to myself. And
I'm
like,
the same way. Like I will be fully in the weeds at work, and I will be overrun and like ragged, and then somebody will ask me like if I need help. Mind you, like my manager now is just like, I know you hate asking for it, but you need to ask for help. I feel like in every other aspect of my life, because I'm choosing to spend time with these people, it's easier for me to ask for help when I need it. Whereas at work, I feel like I shouldn't be asking for help.
Right.
Like I've gotten to the point now where like I'm kind of comfortable, but most of the time before I would just like, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like 8 hours in, fully in the weeds, and I'm just like, oh yeah, no, I'm okay.
It might partly be like just not wanting to think about the stress, because like I could see that for myself, where by talking to everybody else about how busy and how stressed I am, now I'm just talking about, I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing anything to actually relieve the stress, whereas me just staying in my lane and doing the work that I need to do, that to me is relieving the stress. And me sharing that I'm stressed out isn't really doing anything, except now everybody's like everybody else knows, and I feel like they might even come and check in. They're like, oh, are you still stressed? And to me that stresses me out more. It's like, just like we don't
need to talk about it anymore. I found like for me, like I'm a fairly like organized person, and I don't think you always need to go to other people. But I've like learned to like my mom has these 3 things that she said to me my whole life. I've had anxiety. I've had anxiety my whole life, but like diagnosed when I was like 7, so pretty young, like grade 3. Are you 7? I don't know. But I've had it my whole life, and my mom, bless her, she's like the best support system anyone could ask for, and she's always said 3 things that I've like carried with me through my life is, remember you are loved, breathe, and you can only do one thing at a time. And whenever I'm like,
that's good,
overwhelmingly stressed, like really stressed, I remember those 3 things, and genuinely it's almost like a mantra at this point. Like it calms me down. My friends use it now. And when I don't think I need to ask for help, when I'm overwhelmed and I need things to be happening, I always just like take my time. So and I've gotten a lot better at it, because I often like take on a lot of projects at once. Like I'm like, oh, I can do it. I'm great at multitasking, you know? So now I take my time when I do things, and they're going to happen when they're going to happen, because anything rushed isn't going to be good. And then I always like make a little, like a to-do list, like the smallest things to the biggest things, or in order of like due dates or whatever. And I find like I work so much more efficiently, and like acknowledging that I'm stressed is the first thing I need to do, because I'm like, okay, now what?
Right.
And then now what? And do like work on it step by step.
Right. And the remember you were loved probably cuts through some of the fear associated with whatever task you're doing. 'Cause like people will often have like a fear of failure. Like, what if I fail this? Like my life's going to go down the drain.
Yeah.
But I guess it's like, even if I fail, you still remember people love you.
Yeah.
Which,
and they're going to, if they're, you know, like your family and your close friends, like the people that are very important, like they're always going to love you regardless. Like you're not doing anything terrible. If you fail, but you learn from that, right? Like I love failing because I learned something. Like weird thing to say, but every time I fail, I'm like, didn't get it this time. Like didn't do great this time. But
right.
These are the things that I can improve on if I want to try again.
Yeah, it's definitely a great attitude to have.
Yeah.
Like I don't like to fail, but yeah, if you're able to see the benefit in the failure, that's good, especially when you're like beginning something new, because it's almost inevitable that you're going to have some rough patches. Like the first time you're trying something, the expectation almost should be that this isn't going to be super top quality. Like this is going to be what it's like to do it the first time. And so in that sense, it's like you just do your best and remember that it's going to be okay on the other side. I wanted to bring up the fact about how vulnerability is pretty crucial for making connections with other people. Like if you are ever with people and they're just unwilling to admit anything like vulnerable about their like human, like they don't want to admit any of the fragile aspects of their humanity. Do you find it's more difficult to connect with that person? Like they just want to put on the front that everything's okay, and it's they almost have a false like invincibility that they're trying to present. It's harder to connect. And I've even found with myself whenever I'm trying to put on a facade of like no I'm okay, I'm not, I don't know, you know what I mean? And I find it more difficult to like connect to people. And it might be what you were because of what you were saying before about how when one person opens up, it really makes the other people relax a little bit. Like, okay, I like this. Like that person's willing to be open and share, and that gives me a sense of comfort.
I think being vulnerable is definitely a way to make connections, and typically I find, which is super fun for me, but people say, I've never told anyone this before. Like I'll just meet somebody and they're like, I don't know why I'm telling you this.
When you hear that, you perk up a bit.
I'm like, oh, that's so nice. When people don't open up, it's not like I'm gonna pry for them, but again, like it is, you do it in your own time. And I think the more I and other people that are in that person's life or whatever in that moment, at least the more that we are vulnerable and open to like receiving anything from that person, whatever it is that they want to talk about, the more comfortable they're going to feel, you know, to do so. And like I've had people that seem like rocks, right? Like kind of walk through life and they wear this armor. And seeing people, like not in a terrible way, but seeing people that are like that break down is kind of like the most beautiful thing, because they always after I know it sounds terrible, but they always after.
But I just immediately pictured you or like saying that as the person's breaking down. It's the most beautiful thing.
This is the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. It's amazing because after they've broken down, like I've seen some of the strongest people I've known, and I want to put that in quotations because by that I mean what is considered currently as like socially strong, like what we would socially consider as strong. The strongest people I know that are rocks and wear armor, when I see them break down, or the first time I've seen them break down, it is beautiful because after it always follows with wow, I feel so much better. Wow, I feel like a weight is lifted, or something synonymous to those, right? Like it always follows that path. It's never not followed that path. Like even like my father, like he is an immigrant from Jamaica, right? He was born there and grew up Christian, like very like stern Christian beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And as like an immigrant, and I find other people, like I've talked to other people whose family, whose like parents are from other countries, and say the same thing. Like there is this like very strong, we don't talk about our feelings, we don't,
right,
all of these things. And so seeing people like that have carried this incredibly heavy weight where they keep throwing things into, it's almost like throwing rocks into your backpack, like hiking. Like you're going upward eventually, and you're just making it hard. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so seeing that, and then seeing the transformation of growing up to now, whereas like I, even growing up, had like a very hard time like crying. Like I didn't really cry until like last year. I was proud of it. Like it's embarrassing, but I was like, yeah, I don't cry. I'm not like other girls, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And now I'm just like, oh, that made me really sad. Like you made me sad. Like telling people that they made you sad. Like seeing the difference, that the growth that my dad has made, and then the growth that I've made. Like it's a very stark difference, and it's really nice to see, because now he's so open. Like when things are happening, he's just like, oh, that made me really upset or something. Yeah. Like if I say something, like I'm not perfect, like I'm going to say things that are going to hurt people's feelings sometimes, but I want to grow from that, and I want them to tell me, like as hard as it is for me to hear and for them to tell me, like I want to be able to make like an authentic apology, right? Like a good apology. I'm huge on those. And then also like allow them the space to tell me when I've done something wrong. Like I have to be vulnerable and willing to listen, and they have to feel safe enough that they can say something. That's
awesome that he's made that transition, because I could see for people who've been doing the opposite for a long time, it can be a heavy task to start to try to relieve that stuff. Like if we keep that same analogy of you're putting rocks in your backpack, and now you get to the point where you have like 50 pounds of rocks in your backpack, it's a bit of a daunting task to like really pick through those rocks, examine each one of them, like what is this one, why is this one here, and then toss them aside. But it and it's a lot of work, really. Like people don't even often want to get started, because it's like, I don't just let me just stuff it away, skeletons in the closet type of thing. But you'll never really get the relief unless you dive into it. Like why am I putting that rock? What is that one?
It's like starting therapy. They do that. Like in therapy, it's like you say one thing and it keeps coming. You're like, oh my gosh. And then there's also this, and then there's, oh my gosh. And then there's this, and then there's this, and this. And it keeps coming, and you don't realize how many rocks you're putting in your backpack.
Right.
Until you get to the point where you unload one and you're like, wait, I need to unload another one. Hold on. I need to unload another one. Like I've had like 5-hour-long conversations with people where I'm just like, you speak when you're ready to speak. Like I've had one of my friends come over at like 2 a.m, and she was like, are you awake? And I don't really sleep. So and I was like, yeah, obviously I'm awake, don't be silly. She comes into my bed full tears, like full tears, and I've seen her cry, but at like romantic movies or things like that. And so it wasn't like anything new, but it was like a cry I've never seen before. And so she comes into my bed and she can't breathe. She's hyperventilating. And I was like, okay, you just speak when you're ready. She was like, okay. She's like hiccuping and whatever. And so I'm sitting in my bed doing my Sudoku, as I do, and with my lamp on. And it's like, well, you just talk when you're ready. I'll be over here. Right. And like 15 minutes later, she finally like unloads, and she says,
solve the puzzle by then?
One thing. Oh yeah, I do them so
You're
quick.
Huh?
Yeah. I have 5 Sudoku books. That's my favorite thing.
Sorry to interrupt that, but I was curious.
Yeah. I did solve it. Yeah, it was hard too. So, but yeah, 15 minutes later, surely enough, she opens up, and it's like one thing that was bothering her, and then she goes, oh yeah, also this, and then, oh my gosh, there's also this, and finally, like we had talked through it, and it was good, and I was just listening, you know, like I don't have a right to have any input here. She's just talking about her feelings, and I was just listening, and then she got through, and she's like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And she is a lot like how I was, where she would hold everything in, and then once it got too much, it would explode. And this was this was the event,
right,
where it exploded. And surely enough, when we were done, it was 2 or 1 when she came in, and I think 5 or 6 when she left.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was a good, for me, I feel like I learned a lot from her, and I think it helped our friendship and our relationship, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, now I understand why you react certain ways in certain situations. Also, I feel closer to you because I know these things, and I can relate to you on some of them. And we had a lot of like heartfelt moments where I was like, wow, I've been through that. I didn't know that you went through that. And she was like, I didn't know that you went through that.
Yeah.
And then for her,
you don't even really have to say too much either. Like a lot of the relief just comes from her like spilling the rocks out on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there's any value in sometimes actually just putting on the strong face and pretending as if there is nothing wrong? Because I can think of a couple examples where like there's always the parent has to put on a strong face so their kid doesn't like freak out or panic when there's some issue going on. Or even at I do Muay Thai kickboxing, and like we're always encouraged to not show if we've gotten hit. Like let's say you get like punched in the body, because
they'll know that that's like a painful spot and they can go back and hit it.
Yeah, exactly. So like the goal is to just pretend as if it didn't hurt at all.
Okay.
But that's a pretty like unique case where like it might actually be beneficial to not show that actually did hurt. But yeah, could you think of any other examples, or do you ever see that where like it actually is valuable where by hiding those vulnerabilities?
I think there's definitely value in certain situations. Like it's definitely situational. There's definitely value in certain situations, but in those situations you don't necessarily have to show it to that person specifically, right? Like vulnerability is earned by those that you trust. So and those that you value and the relationships that you trust. So in terms of like Muay Thai, it's not necessarily something to be like, you hurt me, you know? But or even with parents, like if something happened, right? But you don't necessarily have to, you can put on the brave face depending on the situation. My mom was always very open with me, like growing up, very open with things that were happening. And I think it didn't make me like grow up fast or anything, but I like understood everything. Like whenever I had a question, my mom would answer it honestly. And I always really respected that. You know, like when it comes to talk about like sex, when I was like 7, I was like, the grade 6s are talking about this. What are they saying? Yeah. And she's a nurse. So she was just like, okay, well, let me just explain this to you. She was very open about it. She's always answered everything. So in terms of like parents, I think definitely there's a few things that you can put on a brave face. But you can take that brave face off with certain people. So like if something happened and you don't want to tell your kid about it, you want to put on a brave face, you can still have other people to go to, like your partner or your friends, where you can shut it and be honest about it.
I like what you said about how vulnerability is something that's earned. And I think that might be why it's like critical for connection, or it enhances connection, is because when you see somebody being vulnerable with you, you might have the like intuition that, oh, I earned this in a way. Like it's like, oh, they trust me enough, they feel comfortable enough with me, and so then it definitely enhances that connection. Are you ever fearful of being vulnerable because you're there's an uncertainty in as to what people are going to do with the information that you disclose, or if it's like more like a physical vulnerability? I mean, you never know what the other person's going to do with it. And obviously that's part of the reason why we were saying it's associated with courage, is because there's that fear. But how do you deal with that fear? And
I think it's always scary. It's not to say that I'm like this person that walks through life and is just like so open all the time about everything. It's definitely a little less scary now. But it's still scary. It's like I'm still terrified when I do it. But I'm comfortable because I know I'm going to grow from it. And there's nothing I want more than to grow as a person and be more emotionally intelligent and aware and all those things. I'm still scared sometimes, mostly because, yeah, like you said, like vulnerability is, you never know how it's going to be received. So in those terms, I'm like, oh, this person could hate it, but I am vulnerable with the people that I trust. And I feel like, will receive it well. I'm never, unless it's, you know, like a coworker who like said something out of pocket, like I'm not gonna, like I will say that now. That's probably like the most terrifying, because I don't have like an actual, like I have a working relationship with them. I don't have like a, and it's friendly or whatever, but it's not like a proper, we don't have like proper rapport. We see each other on Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and that's it.
Right.
So in terms of like that, when somebody hurts my feelings, that's probably when I'm the most terrified, because one of my greatest fears always is hurting other people's feelings. When I was a kid, when I would cry, the only time I would cry is if I hurt somebody else. I would never cry if I fell off my bike. There was this one time, right when I took my training wheels off, I built a ramp with one of my neighbors.
Yeah.
Obviously not a smart idea, but whatever. I did it.
Though.
It was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was flying in the air, and then I landed and I skid across the ground, like body only.
Yeah.
I got up and I didn't cry, and my mom was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But if I hurt like a classmate's feelings, or if I made somebody else cry, or if I would always break out into tears, because I felt this like overwhelming like level of guilt. And so for me, I am always afraid that I'm going to hurt somebody else's feelings if I tell them that I hurt my feelings. So I used to just like bottle it up. Like if my friends hurt my feelings, I would never say anything.
Yeah.
Or all these things. But then people are like, they don't want to hurt your feelings either, right? Most of the time.
Yeah.
And so if you tell them that they hurt your feelings, like they will more than likely shift. Like it's an uncomfortable conversation. It will be. But they will shift the way that they you know, treat you.
Right.
You know, like it's very scary though.
Yeah. It sounds like you're like deeply empathetic. If that's the case, where you're more likely to be getting emotional by hurting somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, because on the like fear of being vulnerable, I know like people love to gossip, right? Like they love to like chat and share information about other people.
Yeah.
So in that aspect, that's just knowing that is one reason why I'd be fearful of being vulnerable. Have you ever had it like come to I don't know, like bite you or whatever, where like you almost got too vulnerable and then or shared it with the wrong person? Has that ever happened?
I'm going to say no, and I'm going to do a little Brene Brown thing here.
Okay, let's go.
She always talks about how she doesn't care about I'm not doing this verbatim, but she doesn't care about the people who aren't in the arena with you. Like the people who are in the arena are strong, right? And I think it's
the man in the arena.
Yeah. And I used to be so hyper aware of what everyone was saying about me all the time.
Yeah.
But now I just like, if people say something, also I'm just, with the vulnerability comes honesty and truth. And so if people ask me something, I will just be open about it. Like they're like, oh, like, did this happen last weekend? That's super weird. I'm like, oh yeah, it did. Like, it was very out of character for me, but I did that. I'm sorry.
Right.
Or well, I won't say sorry like that. I actually have a proper apology, but yeah. And whenever it comes back to me, I typically am just gonna like be as honest as I can about it, and that's it. And I think people know that now. I used to be very aloof before. I would just kind of like, people would come to me and I'd be like, that's not your business. Right. You don't need to know that. Or I would just straight up deny it. And now I'm super like open in regards to like, if people are like, oh yeah, I heard this, or like even if it's about other people, like if people are like, did this friend and this friend do this, whatever. I'd be like, oh well, it's not my business. Like I'm not gonna tell other people's business where it's not my place. But if it's in regards to me, like absolutely, like it doesn't matter how embarrassing it is. Like, I will more than likely like be honest and upfront about it.
Yeah, vulnerability is like extremely closely tied to honesty, and I think it provides similar benefits. I know I brought this up about when I did the podcast about lying, how by avoiding lying, you avoid living like parallel storylines. Like you have parallel storylines running in your mind all the time.
Yeah.
And by being more vulnerable, you avoid creating the multiple stories for your own life, and you just have the one.
Yeah.
And then that provides so much psychological peace and
oh my gosh, it's so calm.
It's just like, hey, what happened, and there's no like me trying to pretend this was the case, or thinking about this and trying to keep track of, oh, what did I say to that person?
Oh, it's exhausting.
How do I have to act in front of that person?
Yeah.
There's just one thing, and you just do that one thing, and it's just
so relaxing.
So much more comfortable.
Yeah, like, oh gosh, it's the most relaxing. Like, I feel like I've like come to terms with that, of like how I was before. And like, not necessarily that I would lie, but like I would omit a lot of things, which in and of itself is a form of lying. But I would just omit so much, and God, I was tired. Like, it's exhausting, like just mentally draining to be like that all the time. And like you said, to have these like multiple storylines, and I'm like, okay, what did I say to this person again? Because I have to relay that same thing to this person, so that if they talk about it, they will have the same story from me. You know? Like, in high school especially, oh my goodness, like it was like just not it just wasn't, like, I was definitely a bit toxic. I feel like everyone was a bit toxic in high school, but I just like
I feel like part of that might be because people aren't even aware of their own vulnerabilities. Like, I know I had extremely bad social anxiety in high school, elementary, but I wasn't even super aware of it. Like, I remember at one point, I think it was like grade 10 or 11, somebody brought up anxiety to me, and I was like, what is that? Like, I was like, I didn't even really know what it was. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I don't have that. What is like? But in reality, I had it pretty bad. But I just I wasn't even aware of it, because I didn't know myself very well, and I didn't know what anxiety even was, really. Yeah. And so like, through uncovering your own vulnerabilities, I feel like you're a lot more likely to be accepting of other people's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you don't even know your own, and then you see all these other people like throwing around their vulnerabilities, you'll be like, why do you have those? Like, I don't have those. But the reality is you probably do. You're just not super aware of it.
Have you, like, since realizing that you have or have had anxiety, have you done any work on that, or like growth?
A lot, actually. There, a huge reason why I started this podcast was to try to like overcome my fears with public speaking, and just having conversations with other people. Yeah. Really, that was like, if I had to say like there was a primary reason for starting the podcast, that's probably it. But there's a number of different things. I'm just curious about learning about a bunch of topics, but that probably is one of the main reasons. And I think what really helped too is just accepting the fact that it was a problem, or like a problem might not be the right word, but like that it is something that I was dealing with, and that becomes the first step in trying to overcome it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Acknowledging is such a huge thing. Yeah.
And I've definitely gotten a lot better with that, for sure. Like, I used to be like way more nervous when like starting up a podcast. Yeah. The first podcast I ever did, like, it was just with my brother and my sister, and I was even like pretty nervous for that, because I was as I was trying to do the introduction, I was thinking about, oh, like, everybody's gonna be hearing this, and it was the first episode too, and I'm like, I don't know how this is gonna be perceived, you know what I mean? And I just I don't know, like, my voice started like cracking up a little bit. We had to do a retake actually. And that was just me, my brother, my sister, pretty comfortable environment. Yeah. But just the thought of other people hearing my voice, that was very that caused me a lot of like nerves to spike a lot. So,
and it's also like how it's gonna be received. Like, I find like I when I like started making videos, everyone kind of like puts on this persona. I feel like their voices change. Like, they have like a video voice or whatever. I don't know how you would say it, but like when, and I definitely like did that. Like when I first started making videos, like my voice was like much higher. Like not that like my voice is super low, but I have a very raspy voice. So like when I would do things, I would try to sound like more feminine, like, right? And now I'm just kind of like I'm so comfortable in it, or like more comfortable in it, that I'm just like, like here I am. But before I was like, this is terrifying, and I would like try to be like super high.
But that definitely provided, like, probably made you feel so much better, because it's like, it's your voice at the end of the day.
Yeah, like I'm less tense, and I think it's received. People have a pretty good tell, like they can tell when you're, you know, like doing like a news voice or something like that. You know, they can tell that it's sort of like this facade. Right. Whereas like when you're authentic and you're just like yourself, you're gonna get more draw from that than if you were putting on like a sort of mask.
Yeah, 100%. Because people can see through it pretty much 100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Tej, we've been going a little over an hour now, so we'll close it in. But
okay.
I do want to ask you, like, how do you think people can be more positively vulnerable? In a little bit of preparation for this podcast, I started looking up your girl Brene there.
Love her.
And one thing she mentioned was that gratitude could help. But maybe I didn't do enough research, but I heard her say that, and I wasn't totally clear on how that could benefit. How do you think gratitude could help with vulnerability, or maybe other ways in which people could become more positively vulnerable?
I think one thing is definitely the shifting from the what ifs. Like what ifs are terrible, right? Like okay, but if I'm open about this, what if they don't take it well? But what if they did? Right. So shifting your perspective from because that's anxiety speaking, right? Like you're just like, well, what if this doesn't go well? If you do a thing and you're like, well, what if this is terrible? What if it isn't? Like that's one thing. And then also in terms of gratitude, I do this thing. It's a little bit silly. But I write down a thing every single day that I'm thankful for. Could be like the smallest thing. Could be like, I'm thankful for this like floral blanket that I have. It's my favorite, you know? Yeah. And then on days where I'm feeling super like upset or super anxious or like sad, I'll like read through the list. Right. And it's just a book. I used to do it when I was a kid with my mom. I think I was a bit more cynical than children should be. Yeah. And I used to do Post-it notes on my wall, like a Post-it note a day. I think that helps a lot in terms of looking at things in a more positive light, and in turn just being more positive with yourself and in your vulnerability. Right. Yeah, I like that what if and thinking of it on the positive side. Yeah. Like, what if you could get to the point where all these things that you're afraid of expressing that are just like realities about yourself. Yeah. What if you could put those all out on the table and feel okay about that? Yeah, exactly. And I just picture the amount of peace that provides you. Yeah. But no, this has been really good talking to you about this. Yeah. So I think we'll wrap it up now. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you for coming, and thanks for everybody for listening. All thank you. Goodbye. Bye.